Hey Mark, thanks for that the recitation of that poem by A.R. Emmons. I want to go ahead or Emmons. I'm going to go ahead and repeat it here. It was the reeds give way to the wind and give the wind away. So the portrait that's sort of painted here, the scenery which is being described, uh, is one of a sort of I kind of imagine a field or uh, some area by the lakeside or something, where the reeds are, gently blowing and swaying in the wind. But at the same time, of course, that they're giving way and bending to the wind, they are also shaping the current of the wind and really making wind, uh, making wind possible. Without something to blow, then or something to shape, the wind would not really be wind. It would just be gas moving around or something, gas swirling. And how we originally discover wind is not by directly seeing wind, but through its sort of disclose through its uh, revealing itself through its action uh, on what is actually it is not, but which it actually at the same time requires in order to be what it is. So it's this shaping. I think it's kind of a dialectic. We call it a schema that's being expressed here by A.R. Emmons when the reeds give way to the wind, and give the wind away. So I mean, to give the wind. I thought at first it was give the wind a way, as an a way, not a way. Um, and so that that would be saying that the reeds themselves give they give an sort of articulation to the wind as and make it wind, while at the same time the 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 wind has sort of I don't know, you can think of it like evolutionarily has shaped the way that reeds uh, are self-organized, that make themselves essentially. The form has been the form of a reed and the way that its flexibility and its whole being is sort of a manifestation of this entire history of a relationship with wind and the atmospheric conditions and the state of the environment, which is constantly in flux. Um, so anyhow, the schema itself, which is sort of this shaping and being shaped at the same time, is something that's I think it's kind of has to do with the Hegelian, well, what is said to be the Hegelian uh, sort of well, Hegel's dialectic was sort of like the germ for all these ideas that became prominent for organizing people's thought in in philosophy. Schopenhauer did it. Hegel did it. Schopenhauer had a sort of negation. There's a negating, and then negating give rise to a positive, and that being negated and transformed. And he describes that in his book, The World as Will and Representation. Hegel has the master-slave dialectic, which I don't know if it plays that serious a role in his philosophy as a whole, but there is this sort of like being and becoming, collapse into nothingness, and you get all these steps and transformations that go on in his logic. And yeah, and then well, Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre has that going on, the in itself and the for itself, annihilating itself, and you've got these complex logical structures going on, and then you have Merleau-Ponty, who um, he has like this idea of the intertwining. Anyway, so the example that Merleau-Ponty gives is that while I'm actively observe, or why I'm the active spectator, the active person appreciating the like say a, a painting in a museum. I am sort of actively exploring this painting and appreciating it, moving around, looking at it from different angles, in different lighting contexts, and etc. Getting closer and farther away, you know, feeling more connected to it, and then sort of more, less connected and more distracted. When this is back and forth interplay. While that's happening, there's also this passive side where the the lighting context in the atmosphere, the lighting is sort of leading my gaze, and the painting itself uh, makes certain demands upon me. Where so the the painting, based on its size, its shape, its orientation, the sort of the articulation and relationship of the details, and then also its relationship to the background upon which it's been set up. All of these factors really make a demand and constrain my own activities, and so it's a kind of passivity on my part, in some sense. So again, it's like the painting, um, the observer articulates and brings the painting into being as a painting, right? Discloses the being of the painting. But at the same time, the painting in its structure, in its physical, in its configuration, uh, gives, is sort of bending or modulating the the behavior, the posture, and the movement in some sense of the observer. So there's this shaping and being shaped at the same time here. And you know, I guess this is kind of a good time, since it's kind of convenient that I left off on my reading of John Haugeland's article Truth and Finitude. I left off on section 3, um, where he's going to describe how he says, as I mentioned at the outset, disclosedness, in the Heideggerian term, disclosedness, is analogous to apperception, the Kantian form, in two ways. First, it is the condition of the possibility of comportment toward entities as entities. And second, it is at once a disclosing of the being of entities and a self-disclosing. So he says, we have just we have just seen what disclosing being means and how it is a prerequisite to ontical comportments toward entities as entities. But what does that have to do with self-disclosing? In this section, I will give an initial account of self-disclosing and then explain why it is and must be integral with disclosing the being of entities. So there is this sort of like a similar kind of schema going on in Heidegger's notion of disclosedness, as far as Haugeland wants to interpret it and lay it out. Disclosedness is is a disclosure, always a disclosure of the being of entities, but at the very same time, it's a self-disclosure of Dasein to Dasein. So this is like pre-reflective self-awareness, as like Dan Zahavi, if you've heard of him, would describe it. Um, Basically, the idea, it's kind of like the way that the wind gives way to the reeds give way to the wind. So the wind is pushing on the reeds, but at the same time, when the reeds give way to the wind, they give the wind away. They show the wind as what it is. Um, and so this is just saying that just the structure, the underlying structure here is the same. Dasein discloses the being of entities, but at the very same time, it discloses it reveals its own being to itself. So it's not in self-reflection that for Heidegger that we originally and primordially um, come to know ourselves, but rather it's through our engagement, our being in the world, that we come to be at home and familiar with entities or not, and come to have a self-familiarity at the same time with our own self. Uh, so you can see the isomorphic sort of uh, comparison that can be made here. Um, I'll just keep reading. He says, but what does that have to do with self-disclosing? In this section, I will give an initial account of self-disclosing and then explain why it is and must be integral with disclosing the being of entities. And that will enable us to see, though, well, that will enable us to see, though again only in a preliminary way, how ontical truth is binding on Dasein. Okay, well, let me explain this. So here's another aspect of that schema that you were just describing, or I was just describing also. Whenever any, so this is the first paragraph that I had skipped. Whenever any entities are discovered, they are discovered by Dasein. It is Dasein that, in comporting itself toward entities, undertakes to get them right. That's what ontical truth is. Thus, really, it is Dasein that is beholden in any beholdenness to entities. So Dasein, in what's called ontical truth, in its comportment toward entities, which is why it's called ontical, because it's about entities, not the being of entities, which would be ontological. In its comportment toward them, it seeks to get them right. And so in that sense, we would say, behold, that's the way that the that word is used. Behold, like as in, now we have revealed the truth. So when you're trying to get things right, like use a hammer as a hammer, as it's supposed to be used, or when you play chess, you are always trying, you never want to do legal moves, those aren't, because that's not part of chess. Uh, Things like this, or scientists are testing a hypothesis and they're trying to get things right. There's something about humans, humans are the ones who are trying to get things right, or trying to disclose entities as they really are. And so we're trying to, say, behold and understand entities and in their objectivity, in their ontical truth. But he says, thus, really, it's Dasein, ourselves, who is beholden in any beholdenness to entities. This beholdenness of Dasein must also belong to any adequate account of ontical truth. So he says, whenever entities are discovered, they are discovered by Dasein. But there's a beholdenness of Dasein. And to avoid confusion, I will refer to this second essential side of beholdenness as the bindingness of ontical truth. So beholdenness is where we sort of discover entities and get them right in ontical truth. But there's also the second side, essential side of beholdenness, which is the bindingness of ontical truth, namely its bindingness on Dasein. Explaining the essential bindingness of ontical truth is the second stage in its grounding. Okay, so then he's talking about disclosing this and self-disclosing. And let's try to wrap this up in describing that. In the first place, and usually, Dasein does not discover itself by, say, using, observing, or measuring itself. Rather, in each case, it simply lives its life. And remember, he says, that's important. He says, in each case, Dasein simply lives its life, mostly by taking care of its daily business. Oh, and he says, the Dasein in each case. Dasein in each case means each individual person, whether or not one accepts my controversial suggestion that Dasein as such is not individual or personal. As Heidegger says, we are what we do. Sein und Zeit 126, 239. That is, in each case, we comport ourselves toward ourselves as ourselves. That is, as the entities that we are, by living our lives as our lives. As with any comportment toward entities as entities, we do so in terms of a disclosing of being, our being. This disclosing too has the form of an articulated